Welcome to The Explainer. Now, we all think we know the story of the Titanic. But what if there was more to it? A lot more. Today, we're going to look at this famous disaster through a very different lens.
So, here's the big question. Was the Titanic sinking just a terrible accident? You know, a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Well, let's dive into that by looking at some pretty chilling things that happened long before the ship ever hit the iceberg. Stuff that suggests maybe bad luck had nothing to do with it.
All right, so the first piece of this puzzle, it's a book, a work of fiction that seems to have predicted the whole disaster with, and I'm not exaggerating here, stunning accuracy. Honestly, this story is so weird, it almost defies belief.
Okay, so back in 1898, this author, Morgan Robertson, writes a novel called Futility. Now get this, this was a full 14 years before the Titanic ever set sail. And in his book, he describes the sinking of this huge, supposedly unsinkable luxury ship named the Titan. Yeah. Sound familiar? Oh, it gets way stranger.
I mean, just look at this comparison. The similarities are absolutely uncanny. It's not just the name, Titan versus Titanic. They both sank in April. They both hit an iceberg. They were even roughly the same size. But here's the real kicker, the most chilling part. The book identified the exact fatal flaw, not having enough lifeboats. And this was all written down years before the Titanic was even a blueprint.
And the story doesn't end there. The author, Morgan Robertson, he actually took his own life shortly after the real Titanic sank. The reason was never known. It just adds this whole other layer of mystery, right? You just have to wonder what was going through his head when he saw his fictional story play out as a real-life nightmare.
Okay, so the prophetic novel is one thing. But it wasn't the only strange omen tied to this voyage. Let's move on, because there were also whispers of a curse, something much older and way more sinister that was supposedly on board.
It turns out all sorts of people were having these terrible premonitions. We've got John O'Donoghue, a British industrialist who had the same dream of the ship sinking 2 nights in a row, and it freaked him out so much he canceled his ticket. Then there's a Canadian pastor who, on the very day of the disaster, dreamed of a huge ship hitting an iceberg. But the wildest story of all, it involves an ancient passenger, and yeah, an alleged curse.
So, believe it or not, traveling in the Titanic's cargo hold was a sarcophagus, and inside was the mummy of an Egyptian priestess, Princess Amun-Ra. This wasn't just any old artifact. It had a reputation, a long, dark history of bringing absolute disaster to pretty much anyone who came near it.
And this timeline, wow, it lays out the whole trail of this supposed curse. It starts in the late 1890s. A guy buys the mummy in Egypt, then just wanders off into the desert and vanishes. His buddies, they suffer accidents, go broke, get sick, so it gets donated to the British Museum. And what happens there? Strange noises, a guard dies on duty, a worker gets hurt, even the museum's director dies at his desk right after moving the mummy. So finally, in 1912, an American archaeologist buys this cursed mummy and puts it on a brand new ship to get it to New York. And that ship? The Titanic.
Okay, let's just take a breath here. We have a novel that predicted the disaster, we have people having vivid nightmares about it, and we have a supposedly cursed mummy on board. So, we have to ask the big question that our source material brings up. So what is it? Are these all just random, spooky coincidences? You know, stories we've pieced together after the fact to make it seem more mysterious? Or is something else going on? Our source argues that no, these are not accidents. They're all links in a chain of something much bigger.
And to explain all these strange connections, the author introduces a concept called biran. It basically translates to inevitability. It's this idea that the entire universe, it operates on an inescapable underlying order, that everything, from the biggest stars down to the smallest events in our lives, is following a predetermined path. What we call chance or coincidence is just part of the script.
So what does that really mean, this universal order? Well, according to this view, it's not some kind of magic or mystical force. It's more like an observable law that governs everything, from the biggest cosmic events right down to the little details. I mean, think about it. We see it in space, right? The stars, the planets, they all follow these precise, predictable orbits. It's not random. It's like a perfectly choreographed cosmic dance, all dictated by the laws of physics. And you see it right here on Earth, too. The tides rise and fall because of the moon. The seasons change because our planet is tilted. These aren't just happy accidents. They're part of a predictable, unbreakable system, an order. And then, taking it even further, the source argues you can see the same pattern in human history itself. Empires rise, and then they fall. Technology always marches forward. It's argued that these aren't just random events either, but predictable patterns, part of a much bigger historical path.
Okay, so that's all very grand, right? Cosmic stuff, the sweep of history. But here's where it gets really personal. The source takes it one step further and asks, what if that same inevitability applies to our lives, to you and me?
From this point of view, our lives are pretty much already written. I mean, look at this list. The exact time and place you were born, your height, your looks, who you become friends with, who you marry, even how many kids you have, what job you end up in, how much money you make, right down to the biggest turning points in your life, and even when and how you'll die. It's all seen as predetermined, all part of that same universal order.
So this brings us back to the Titanic. And here's the crucial point. From this perspective, the sinking wasn't an accident at all. It was inevitable. It was always going to happen. And that means the prophetic novel, the nightmares, the curse, they weren't warnings that people could have used to change things. They were just signs, ripples in the water, showing a fate that was already sealed and couldn't be escaped. And that leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to think about. Can anyone truly escape the change of inevitability? It's a really profound thought, maybe even a little unsettling. If our lives, if all of history is just following a predetermined path, what does that say about free will? It takes this famous disaster and connects it to one of the biggest philosophical questions out there. So, what do you think?